basically, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be presenting a argument that the number one most dominant sort of form of slavery today is wage slavery, and thus must urgently be abolished. And I'm going to start with Martha Jacques Derrida and interrogate the word slavery itself. So the word actually covers a broad range of different things. So, Martha Derrida's central move is to question the apparent skeleton of words. So, a term like slavery feels solid, like bone, hard, fixed, undeniable, but that rigidity is something grown over time, calcified through repetition, not something born with the word itself. The word is not the body. So, in a Derridian sense, slavery is a signifier, more like a circulatory system than a single organ. Meaning flows through it like blood carrying traces, residues, fragments of past uses. It is not one body but a stitched together anatomy. Across history, slavery has referred to radically different arrangements. These could be chattel slavery, hereditary, racialized, total ownership, but it could also refer to debt bondage, serfdom, penal labor, forced military conscription, domestic servitude, contractual labor under coercive conditions. These differ in legal status, the skeleton holding them upright, a degree of coercion, that is, the sort of pressure on the lungs, and permanence, how long the condition lives in the body, social mobility, how freely the limbs can move, recognition of personhood, whether the face is seen as human. Yet they are all forced into the same mouth, chewed under one word. Now, this is a problem because the dominance of one image. So, Martha Derrida would say meaning is shaped by what the tongue returns to again and again. Today, the word slavery is saturated, its veins thick with the memory of the transatlantic slave trade. That system was racialized and hereditary, totalizing people treated as flesh owned by others, industrial in scale, embedded in global capitalism, marked by extreme brutality in the stripping of the human face down to raw bone. Because it is so catastrophic, it becomes the heartbeat of the word. The effect, so conceptual construction. So this is the sort of key Martha Derrida insight. When one historical form floods the bloodstream of a word, it constricts the arteries of meaning. So when people hear slavery, their minds snap like a jaw around one image. Is this as brutal as the transatlantic system? If not, they swallow the conclusion that it's not really slavery. And so this creates a hierarchy, like a body ranking its own organs. Chattel slavery becomes the vital organ, the heart. Everything else is peripheral tissue, dismissed as metaphor or exaggeration. But Martha Derrida would say this hierarchy is constructed cartilage, not natural bone. It hides the fact that the word has always been a composite body, not a single organism. Number 4, deconstructing of the term. So, deconstruction, a sort of a Derridian reading, doesn't deny the uniqueness of the transatlantic system. It keeps its horror intact, like a scar that must be smoothed over. Smoothed over, but it also refuses to let that scar become the entire skin, reopens the body of the word to its multiple organs and histories, and shows how language itself secretes the limits of what we can recognize. So we arrive at a crucial opening. If slavery is not a single fixed body, then we must examine present conditions without forcing them to match one historical skeleton. That is my sort of deconstruction of the word slavery. So, the next thing that I'm going to move into is an argument against wage slavery, and that it is the dominant form of slavery today. And this will be grounded in Matua Lysander Spooner. So, now we shift to Matua Spooner, who argues from something like a moral anatomy, the idea that each person owns their own body, its bones, blood, and breath, essentially. Number one, Matua Spooner's baseline principle. For Matua Spooner, every person has a natural right to self-ownership, to their own flesh, their own hands, the labor that flows from their muscles. Any system that forces a person to move their body for another without real living consent excuse me, some technical difficulties. So, any system that forces, from a Matua Spooner perspective, a person to move their body for another without real living consent is a violation of their bodily sovereignty. Number two, formal freedom versus real coercion. So, the defenders of wage labor say, quote, workers are free, they can quit. Perhaps I should say that in the Ben Shapiro voice. Workers are free, they can quit. You know, that's Ben Shapiro, right? And a Spoonerian reply, so a reply invoking the spirit of Matua Spooner, would say that freedom exists only in the mouth, not in the stomach. That exists only in the mouth, not in the stomach, is hollow. So freedom, as recognized by Matua Spooner, needs a material foundational base. That's number one. Number two, a choice made under the threat of hunger, exposure, or collapse is a choice with a knife at the ribs. Number three, legal freedom can coexist with economic pressure that tightens like a fist around the throat. So, the question becomes, is wage labor truly voluntary? Or is it a kind of structured suffocation? Number three, structural constraints on workers. So, Matua Spooner would point to systemic sort of features embedded like deep organs, monopoly on land and resources, and people are cut off from the ground that could sustain their bodies. Number two, state-backed property regimes. These act like a skeletal frame that locks resources into a few hands and barriers to independent production, rules and capital constraints that bind movement like stiff joints. The result, most people must sell the use of their bodies, their time, their strength, their attention to survive. This creates excuse me, where was I? Okay, yeah. This creates a condition where you are not owned as property, legally speaking, but your survival depends on submitting your body's motion to another's command. So, number four, why call this slavery? Using the Matua Dedida opening, Matua Spooner, sort of drawing on Matua Spooner, what I argue is that even if wage labor differs from chattel slavery, it shares a core anatomical feature, compelled labor, muscles moving under pressures the person did not freely shape. So there are key parallels between wage slavery and chattel slavery. So dependence on a master employer like a body dependent on an external organ, limited autonomy over one's time and activity, like a limb directed by another nerve, extraction of value from labour, like blood drawn continuously, structural inability to exit without severe consequence, like being unable to leave a body without dying. The differences matter, but they do not dissolve the underlying structure of dependence. Number 5, why it may be the most prominent form today. So, unlike historical slavery systems, wage slavery circulates globally. The blood through the entire body of society. It affects billions. It is embedded in everyday life as ordinary as breathing. It is also invisible as domination because it is framed as employment. It is legally voluntary. It lacks the visible chains, even while pressures remain internal, like organs under strain. So its power lies in how deeply it is metabolized, how natural it feels. The urgency of abolition, this is my case, okay, number 6, the urgency of abolition. So Matua Spooner, and he actually spoke about this, didn't mean abolishing labour itself. He was a workaholic, but rather removing the conditions that force bodies into submission. So, opening access to land and resources, breaking monopolies that restrict economic circulation, allowing people to retain the full product of their labour, the full blood of all their effort, creating conditions where exchange is truly voluntary, not driven by desperation. The aim? A society where no one must bend their body under compulsion just to remain alive. So, the wedding, okay, let's marry Matua Derrida and Matua Lysander Spooner, okay? So, Matua Derrida shows that slavery is not a single rigid skeleton, but a shifting body of meanings. This prevents us from dismissing modern forms simply because they don't resemble one historical wound. And Matua Spooner then presses the point. If we examine the structure, the pressure on bodies, the constraints on movement, wage labour can take on the shape of slavery. The final insight. The combined force of both thinkers shifts the question from surface resemblance to underlying structure. The real question is not, does this look like the worst historical slavery? But are people's bodies being compelled to labour under conditions they cannot meaningfully refuse? If the answer begins to tighten around yes, then on Matua Spooner's terms, it is no longer just a metaphor spoken by the tongue, but a diagnosis written into the body itself. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.